Hello and welcome to Tutorial Tuesdays. I actually had trouble coming up with a topic for this week, so I decided to teach you or show you the behind the scenes of this image that I have been working on. This image is by no means done, but the tutorial today is going to basically cover how to create a snowy plane. So the main detail is going to be using procedural materials to create a nice looking snow, the sculpt tools to sort of sculpt out a plane that you like, the particle tools to figure out how to do grass clumps like this, and lighting in general, how to get the nice long shadows that I have here. So let's go ahead and get started. To start out, first things first, let's go ahead and go into the top view. I have my screencast keys right here so you can see what I'm doing. And we're going to place the camera. And to do that, I'm going to Alt-R to reset the rotation and Alt-G to reset the location. And then I'm just going to hold down Control while I'm rotating this to snap it to increments, and we're going to rotate it 90 degrees. So then we're just going to move it up here like so. So now we have a nice camera. Then I'm going to go ahead and start splitting the viewport like so. So after we set up our camera like that, I'm going to go ahead and add a plane here. This will be our snowy plane. And let's go ahead and set the focal length because we want this to be a wider scene. One of the first telltale signs of a CG scene or a new person to CG is that they haven't played with the focal length on their camera. They leave it at the basic 35 focal length. So we're going to go ahead and set this to 24 because I'm a big fan of wide focal lengths. And we're going to modify the plane over here in the top view so that the base of the plane matches up pretty close to the camera because we don't want to waste any system resources on stuff that's not visible in the camera. Then we're just going to scale the plane up until the edges go past the edges of the camera, and we're going to move this forward until it matches about with the camera again. So you're going to notice that the orange edge disappears at the end of the plane, and that is not what we want at all. We want this to expand into infinity. So let's go ahead and set the clipping on our camera under the camera properties panel right here to 1000 or even 2000 just to be safe. So now if we select this, you'll see that the camera can see that far. The clipping right here designates how far the camera can see. It could previously see 100. I'm not sure if that's Blender units or not, but it's 100 whatever camera units it's using, and now it can see 2000. So we should be able to scale this up, and we want to scale this so that it goes up to our horizon line, basically. One of the biggest problems with creating nature scenes is that people don't scale their grounds up big enough, and they don't meet the horizon, which is halfway, basically, if your camera is horizontal facing, if it's facing 90 degrees. So now our thing goes about to the horizon line, so now it extends far enough out, and that is exactly what we want. So let's go ahead and change the clipping in our viewport as well, because you'll notice that this is not seeing far enough, so we'll change that to 3000, and that should be plenty. Then we're going to go ahead and delete the lamp, and we're going to add a plane, and you all can light your scene to be whatever you want. We're going to scale the plane up, like so. Area lights tend to produce more accurate results. I'm saying area light when in reality it's a mesh light, but it acts like an area light because if you have a lamp or a point lamp, like so, it is going to emit light from a single infinitesimally small point, like so. And that's not realistic. In the real world, every light source has mass or area. It has area to it. So in this case I'm going to use a plane because that way points will be emitting from all over the plane as opposed to just the center. And we're going to add a new material, and I just realized that I'm still in the Blender rendering engine, so you want to move over to cycles, and then we're going to say use nodes. We're going to make this emission. Now the sun is not white, it's going to be orange, and since we're going for sort of an artistic thing, I'm going to up the saturation a pretty good bit, and we can always tweak this later. This is very tweakable. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on rendering in this view down here, but before I do that I'm going to go to the render settings and turn on border. This will limit the rendering to the camera border. You can also render specific areas of the scene, using the Control B hotkey, which allows you to drag a box, which will be your render border. So if I was to go into rendered right now, it will render only in that box. But I like the whole camera, and if you drag over the whole camera, it turns border off, so you have to turn that back on. So now it's only rendering in the camera. And this light is not very, bright, but in my image, you'll notice that I had an object right here, and that gives us our cool shadow that goes down to the corner of the image, which sort of leads the eye up and then over because the chair is facing that way. It's a composition thing, but I really like long shadows as an artistic choice. I think they're pretty cool looking. A lot of people tend to think that ambient occlusion by itself looks pretty good lighting, and those are people that don't have very much experience, because all of the best artistic shots have really cool shadows and use of light. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and, since I don't want to use the chair in this, since I want you to be able to follow this tutorial, we are going to use the monkey, or Suzanne, and we're going to go ahead and place her. We're going to pay attention to our camera view, and we're going to go ahead and place her somewhere on this plane that looks pretty cool, where we can get cool, nice, long shadows. Right here is not very far from the camera. I want her a little bit in, so how about somewhere like that should be pretty good. And we'll go ahead and rotate her so she's facing like that, and scale her up like so. Then we are going to just add a basic material to Suzanne, and we are going to set the shading to smooth and hit Control 3 to apply a subdivision surface amount of 3, which might be a little bit too much, so let's go ahead and change that to 2 actually. The hotkeys are, let me go ahead and add a cube here so I can show you. Control 1 is 1 level, Control 2, Control 3, Control 4, Control 5, etc., etc., etc. will subdivision surface your model. You can also add it through the modifiers panel, but the hotkey is a lot faster. We're going to make our Suzanne face the camera a little bit, and now that will give us an idea of what our shadows are going to look like when we start playing with the light here in a second. Right now, the light is doing absolutely nothing. Let's actually go ahead and use nodes on our world and turn that off just so we can see exactly what our light is doing. And right now it's barely contributing at all because it's so far away and it's pretty small. So we're going to up this to about 10,000, so 10,000, and that should be plenty bright. And I think we want the shadow to go down to the corner like I had it, just because I liked how that looked. And we're going to move this over like that. And mine is rendering very slowly, and that is because I'm still using the CPU. So I'm going to switch to the GPU compute, which will render on my graphics processor, which I currently have an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 560. I would love to upgrade to a 780 in the future. I hit render on the wrong panel. So we're going to leave this guy rendering right here because that will take up minimal memory since it's such a simple scene. And then, to finish our lighting setup, we are going to add a world, which will be a sky. And you can get skies at www.cgskies.com, and the one that I chose is, it's one of these two. I want one that's not cloudy. I want this one, which is a nice night sky. And it's not showing up right now, and I'm not actually sure why that is, so let's go into our node editor to take a look. Oh, it's because I have the strength set to 0. Duh. Now I feel stupid. We're going to set that back to 1, and now we have this sky in the background, but it's very stretched out. So how we can fix that is we can input a texture coordinate. We'll do generated, since that's what the equirectangular is, and then we can add a vector and mapping under our node editor here. And higher numbers, scale it down smaller because it means more repetitions, and since this is a tileable sky and we're not going to see it repeat it all anyway, it doesn't matter that we repeat it. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up to 2 and 2. And then we can rotate our sky around like so until we see some cool clouds. And this is wrong. So it looks like our sky is facing... No, it's correct. Okay, we're good. I am just moving it. I get that confused a lot. I'll accidentally move the sky instead of rotating it, and really you want to rotate it. So we want to rotate it on the z-axis like so. And let's go ahead and up this guy's scale too, so 333 should be pretty good. And now we can see some cool clouds, so let's go ahead and match the sun with our sun, except offset it a little bit because just having a white background like that is not very pretty. And to make a more stylistic scene, we are going to saturate the sky a bit. And how you can do that is with a color and either hue saturation, just to up the saturation, or RGB curves, which I like to use. And I'm going to go to the B, which stands for blue, and I'm going to pump up the blue on the sky to make it more of a snow sky as opposed to a night sky. The night sky is the one that I downloaded because there aren't any like cloudy snow, like winter wonderland scene type skies. And then we can also up the contrast of the sky by playing with the curves to get something that looks pretty neat. And I think that will do. So I'm going to go ahead and move the light a little bit, and we don't want this light to be visible in the viewport. How you can turn it off is you can come right down here to the object settings, and you can go to ray visibility and turn it off for the camera. So now it will no longer be visible in the camera, but it will still affect objects as though it is. So let's go ahead and get started on our snow. Before we add the material to the snow, we want to sculpt it out just so it has some detail so we can tell what the snow is looking like. And how we're going to do that is first I'm going to go in here and I'm going to subdivide it a couple times like so. Then I'm going to add a multi-resolution modifier, and we're going to go to simple and subdivide it even further until we have a good amount of subdivisions to use to sculpt with. That might be a little bit high. My viewport is lagging, so I'm going to go back down to 4 and delete higher. So this is not going to give me as much detail as I would hope, but that is perfectly fine. Let's go ahead and go into sculpt mode. And we are just going to sculpt some neat hills in. I like to use the draw tool for this, which is the default, and you can just sculpt in sort of like this, just by clicking. And if you hold shift, that smooths stuff down, but our smoothing is not very strong right now. How you up the strength of a brush is hitting shift F, and then dragging it in makes it darker on the screen, which means it's getting stronger. Dragging it out makes it lighter, which means it's getting less strong. So this is adjusting the draw strength. We want to adjust the smoothing strength, so we can hit, I'm going to go ahead and drag this over here just so we have more room to work with. We can go ahead and hit S to switch to the smooth brush, and then we can hit Shift F and up the scale all the way. So now it will smooth out a lot more. And if it's still not smoothing, it's because the mesh density is too high, so it already thinks it's smooth because it's already smooth between each individual polygon. So how you can do that, or change that, is change the sculpt subdivisions down and smooth it out like so. To get basic detail in for our snow scene, which I just realized that our plane is not wide enough. It is not going past the edges of the camera, so we're going to go ahead and scale it out like so, and that should be pretty good. So we're just going to sculpt in some basic hills for now, going back to sculpt mode just to get some interesting detail in. So D for draw, probably want to change the strength down a little bit there, shift for smooth. And let's just make something that looks interesting. So we want a variety of hills. We don't just want them all to be in the background. So I'm just going to sort of start sculpting around here. And we could even sculpt a ravine down here and just make an overall interesting terrain. Like so. So that's pretty cool. And then for the monkey, we are going to want to center the viewport on the monkey. And how you center the viewport on an object is you select it and then you hit the period key on the numpad if you have a complete keyboard. So now our viewport is centered on the monkey, who is not even on the plane anymore since I sculpted it down. So I'm going to go ahead and move Suzanne down here. And then we can go back into sculpt mode, and we're going to up the sculpt subdivisions. And notice our sculpting from the previous subdivision stayed. And then we can go ahead and play with the clay, which is C is the hotkey, up the strength. And we're just going to try to sculpt in some detail after we up the subdivisions, which this is not going to be enough at all. which is a little bit something that I was kind of scared of with making a plane that's this big. My plane in the original scene was not this big, but that is quite alright. To fix that, what we can actually do is apply our multi-res, after we go out of sculpt mode, of course, and what we can do here is change this to the adaptive topology. So go back into sculpt mode, come over here, and under topology we can turn on enable dynamic, and then we can change the detail size accordingly. And this has such high subdivisions back here, but this is really far away from the camera, so we don't need that. So a trick we can use is collapse short edges. I'm going to go ahead and save the scene because this has a tendency to crash every once in a while. Not very often, but it can crash. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, wait for it to go through, and then we're just going to hold shift to smooth this down. And as we smooth it, it is going to collapse the edges to make them, at least it should. Oh, nope. It looks like smoothing doesn't do that. So instead, to collapse the edges back here to get less subdivisions as we go further back, I'm going to go to draw. And then we're just going to change the strength to near nothing and just draw over it. And this will collapse the topology down to make it a lot less dense here. We can probably do this over the entire plane. We probably should have just used the dynamic topology from the get-go, but I didn't because I didn't do that in my original scene. I actually didn't use it at all. So now you're going to notice that our plane is either A, going through the camera, or B, is no longer close enough to the camera. And we can fix that by going into edit mode, selecting these vertices, hitting O to enable the proportional editing, and then G, Y, and we can scroll up or scroll back on the mouse wheel to up the influence of our proportional editing, and that will move it in like so. So now we have this lower resolution snowy plane, and we are going to get some higher resolution right here to add some snow mounds for the monkey. So we're going to go back into sculpt mode. Every time you go out of sculpt mode, it disables dynamic topology, so we're going to go ahead and re-enable that. And then we're just going to go ahead and draw. And the closer you get to the mesh, the smaller it's going to do the subdivisions, which is quite nice. So let's say that there's just going to be some snow buildup right here. And it looks like, again, period to go in, the monkey's not on the ground plane anymore. So I was sculpting in a little bit of the wrong area, and that is perfectly alright. We can just smooth that out, go back to draw, and our dynamic is off because I went out of sculpt mode, and then we can just, again, draw in some snow here. Some snow buildup on the monkey. And we can probably turn off collapse edges here now that we are doing spots, individual spots. And let's go ahead and just continue drawing in some monkey detail. Like so. So now we have a, I think, decent enough terrain. Probably maybe sculpt in a little bit more of a hill here. Smooth it down. Sculpt in a bit more hills here in the background. Smooth those down. I'm not going to add mountains in this tutorial. I'll let you watch Andrew Price's tutorial on mountains if you really want to do that. I'm not even sure that's still available on his website, but mountains can be accomplished through the terrain generator that you can get to through the Blender add-ons. I'm grabbing this over here because I want it to stay off screen over here, and then we can drag this down because we don't want such a flat cutoff. And this is an interesting enough terrain, I think, to sort of, I was smoothing it out, but I accidentally smoothed out underneath Suzanne there. I think this is an interesting enough terrain to start with our material. So we're going to go ahead and save again. Now that we have this nice low poly mesh, and then I am going to come over here to our properties, scroll up, make it smooth, and then we're going to add a new material, and we'll call this snow. Now the snow material is a pretty easy one to make, and the monkey is no longer where we want her, so let's move her over here. Let's position her in the camera as we so please, and we can move this again. So we can move our light further back, further up, maybe further back some more, and then up the intensity again to maybe like 40,000. Maybe even 50,000. We'll see once we get the reflections in the snow. Now you're going to notice that this is a pretty harsh hill right here. Like the light is not penetrating it very much. So we're going to go ahead and sculpt a little bit more there. So go back into sculpt mode, in T to get our properties, and then enable dynamic. And we're just going to sort of draw a little bit more here. Like so. And that should give us a little bit more light detail coming from our lamp. Like so. Okay, so that's looking pretty decent. I probably want to extend the hill down here to the camera, but let's go ahead and start working on this snow detail. I'll let you all sculpt your terrain however you want. For the meantime, this is going to be just fine, and we'll go ahead and add that back into Suzanne after we start on the material. So snow material is pretty easy. I'm going to go ahead and up my preview samples to 50. I normally work with 0, but I don't want the tutorial to lag too much, so I'm just going to go with 50 so it will stop at a point. So the material for the snow, like I said, is pretty easy. We want to make sure that the scale on the plane is applied, so we're going to go ahead and hit Control A and scale, so we have a scale of 1, and then we're going to come over here to the material nodes. These are the world nodes, these are the material nodes, and we're going to add in some displacement, and that will be, you know what? I'm going to open some reference just so you all can see what I was working with when I was working on the snow material. So under reference, I have snow 1, and this is some good snow reference that my friend gave me when my snow was looking bad. You're going to notice that snow up close is pretty darn powdery and pretty darn grainy if it hasn't started to melt yet. So we're going to go for that sort of look. And how you approach that is with the noise texture. So under texture, we're going to add noise and plug the factor into displacement, like so. And you're going to notice that nothing's happening, and that's because the noise is not scaled properly. So to scale it properly, we're going to input texture coordinates and object. So now we have this nice looking bump that is a little bit drastic. I mean, we want it to look more like this, I think, where it's nice and fluffy. And to play with the, we also want to play with the size of the noise. I'm sorry, I'm thinking and trying to talk at the same time. So maybe up that to 20 and we'll get some nice fine grain in our snow. Maybe even go back to 15. And that's looking pretty interesting. We can also go ahead and up the strength of our world lighting like so to get some nice fill light in here. Nice bright fill light. And we can go ahead and lower the intensity of the grain on the snow with a converter color ramp. And we can lessen this down to maybe 0.7. Just play with the slider until it looks pretty cool. So that might be a little bit too drastic of sliding down. So I'm going to put this back up a little bit, just so we have some nice fine grain in there. And that is looking, it's looking alright. It's not looking fantastic. So we want a second level of bump to mix this with. So we're going to copy our noise texture, and we're going to plug this one as well into the displacement. And this is just for testing purposes. We're going to mix them here in a second. So for this one's scale, we're going to put it down to 2, maybe even 1. Maybe even lower than that, just to get some bigger bumps here. And then we're going to mix the two noises together with a color mix RGB, and we're going to overlay, which is right here. So now we have our big bumps and our small bumps mixing together and working in unison. Whew. Wow, that's some intense texturing work right there. Now, snow is not going to be perfect like this, though. I mean, this right now is just pure matte. It is pure dull. So we want some reflection in here, too. And how we get that is through a shader, mix shader, and a shader glossy. Then we can mix the two together like so. And that will give us a huge, gigantic specular highlight, but it will also make our snow look a lot softer because it's going to be reflecting the sky now. So let's go ahead and turn this down to like maybe 0.2. Wow, that is still really intense. We can play with the value later, but first we want to up the roughness to about 0.45. We want this to be a nice wide highlight. So let's go ahead and continue playing with this, and then maybe turn this down to 0.05, just so the reflection is fairly minor, but it is there. And then we can also play around with our light a little bit. For instance, where did you go, Mr. Light? Oh, he's way back here. For instance, we can move him over to the left a little bit more so that our monkey shadow is going more towards the corner and we have more directional lighting. And we also want to pay attention to the lighting on the object. Like, we want to get some nice rim on the monkey. So let's just continue playing around with that. For some reason, I am somehow modifying the... okay. When I'm recording these video tutorials, this is not an excuse. This is just me being straight up honest with you here. Sometimes when I do hotkeys or properties or things and then I try to cancel out of them or press keys, they don't read because it's making it lag. It could be the quick key thing here, or it could be the recorder. I'm not actually sure what's causing it. But I think the bigger bump on this is a little bit strong, so we're going to use a color ramp on that too, and maybe move it down some. Until it looks decent. Cool, so now we have a nice snowy plain. But snow, also, this is no longer bumpy enough, or grainy. The grain is no longer bumpy enough, I think, from viewing it in full. We want to see that to some extent. So let's go ahead and mix that by a factor of 1 is where I think it was messing up. Very cool. That should do pretty well. So let's go ahead and go back to sculpting our terrain, and we have to go back into shaded mode here as opposed to rendered. I'm going to go ahead and save really fast because when you're rendering, the sculpting updates don't update until you go out of sculpt mode, which can be quite annoying at times, yes, but it's interesting. And all I ask is that life is interesting. So I'm just going to sort of sculpt around here until I think it looks pretty good. And we also want to go ahead and smooth this out. And go ahead and turn on our dynamic topology and draw in some more snow up on Suzanne, like so. And we want to also go ahead and recenter our view on Suzanne while we're painting that. And since we went out of sculpt, dynamic turns off again. Wow, lots of issues here. Our workflow enhancements that could be made. I wish the software would keep track of when you're in dynamic and when you're not, and leave it as is, because I probably don't want to go out of dynamic topology when I'm just because I left sculpt mode briefly. Okay, so now we have a little bit of snow buildup around Suzanne, like she's been there for a while, and we're also going to go ahead and we can add that a little bit later, or right now. We're also going to add some snow buildup on top of her head, and how we're going to do that is select all of these fancy faces right here. Just whatever looks pretty good to you. These ones down here are going to be hidden from snowfall. Very cool. We're going to hit Shift D to copy those, and then we're going to hit P to separate the selection. So now we have this, and then we are going to add a modifier, and we are going to solidify it, like so. And currently it's thickening down, so we want to change the offset to go up, which will be 1. And we want this to be a heck of a lot thicker, maybe something like that. Then we're going to apply the subsurf and apply the solidify, and we're going to go into sculpt mode here, and we're just going to sort of sculpt around a little bit. smooth it out, make it look more like snow, because snow isn't going to fall, and it will blanket things pretty equally, but hit 5 to go into perspective mode if you wish, by the way. It will make your life easier. 5 switches between perspective and orthographic. So I'm just going to go ahead and sculpt some detail on this snow here, and smooth this off, and smooth it off, and smooth it off a little bit, and then hit I to go into inflate to make this rim of snow a little bit bigger, like so. Maybe smooth that one down a little bit, and move it so it goes into him, so it's not completely consistent. That's looking interesting. And it's also hanging off the back here, which we do not want. So we're going to hit I to inflate this, and then G and grab it down. And then smooth it out a little bit. And now it's even worse. Oh, that edge isn't even visible. We want to work on this one. So hit I to inflate. And again, just sculpt it until it looks good to you. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to follow mine, because mine is definitely by no means perfect. And then we're going to go to object mode. We're going to hit A to apply, Control A, not A just deselects stuff. We're going to hit Control A to apply the scale, and then we're going to add our snow material to that. And let's go ahead and make Suzanne a different color. So let's go ahead and make her a nice orange. Orange is pretty cool. And we'll go ahead and smooth this. Every time you go into dynamic topology, it will unsmooth your mesh. There is an option in dynamic topology to change that, but I did not select it. So we're going to go ahead and hit smooth, like so. Then we're going to go ahead and sculpt in some finer detail on the snow. And how we're going to do that is go into sculpt mode, come down here into the visibility range of our camera, and we want to turn on enable dynamic yet again. And we're just going to start drawing and experimenting until we see it pop up in the camera view. So now what I did for mine, well, first of all, let's go ahead and just add some subdivisions. So I'm going to turn the draw to like 0 and just subdivide the mesh over here so we have a little bit more to work with just in general. It will end up with nicer results. We can go ahead and collapse the short edges here and draw to get rid of the original monkey location. And then we can turn off collapse, turn on smooth shading, and we can go ahead and start sculpting in some detail. So stuff that you want to add is maybe like go into clay, because that will give us a little bit more realistic results. So C for clay, turn up the strength, and then hold down control to go opposite. So stuff we want to add in are like little ditches like this, for instance. So like maybe a little pit here, maybe a little bit of detail back here. I'm going to go to smoothing and Shift F and turn the strength to about 50%. My stomach is grumbling. I am very hungry because I have not had dinner yet. And then we're just going to go ahead and start adding in some snow detail to our snowy plane, like so. That one is a little bit deep, it looks like, from our camera. But we can just add in lots of snow. We can draw, subtract, smooth it all out a little bit. The bumps will still remain in general. And that'll just give us a much more interesting landscape. So let's go ahead and just work on that. And constantly be watching in your camera to see where your bumps are being made. So that's a more interesting landscape in my opinion now that it has some detail in it. Let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like by going into rendered, and that's looking interesting. I think our sun might be a little bit too orange, so we're going to go ahead and lower the saturation here, and we can also probably lower the intensity some. So let's bring that down to like maybe 40,000 or 30,000. And that's looking a little bit interesting, and we can up the saturation a little bit more. all of this is all about endless tweaking to make stuff look good, by the way. So that's looking pretty decent. Let's go ahead and add some nice grass clumps to our snowy scene. And that will start to make things look a lot better, because right now we just have a sculpted plane and we're 30-something minutes into the tutorial. So let's go ahead and add a plane here. We're going to scale it up like so we can have a large area of grass. And we're going to go over to our particle settings. We're going to hit the plus button to add a new particle system. We're going to go to this drop down box and select hair, and that is a lot of grass. So we're going to go to advanced mode and change the number to maybe 5 grass particles, or 5 grass clumps, maybe 7. 7 sounds like a pretty cool number. And then we are going to divide this a little bit and just turn on proportional editing by hitting O and scrolling our mouse wheel down to change the area of influence, and we're just going to sort of drag this around to get a more interesting grass shape, grass emission shape. And then we're going to move this down below the terrain so the grass is still visible. Maybe go to our camera view up here just so we can see where it is. And let's put this guy over here to the left like we had in my original image. So let's scale this guy up a little bit. Move it down so it's below the terrain, and then move it on the y-axis. And then we can play with the mesh to make it sort of match. Like so. And then we can also, I think we probably want to scale this up a little bit so we have a bigger grassy area. And that's looking pretty interesting. Like those could be some neat grass clumps. And then we're going to play with our normal, make it maybe a little bit taller, a little bit shorter, whatever you want to do, and then up the random so they're facing in different directions. And this will give us, this is a good instance to use the Control B in, this will give us a little bit of grass. It's a little bit thin right now, so what we're going to do to fix that is we are going to go down to the cycles rendering settings under the particle settings and change the root to maybe 2 or maybe even 3 if we want to. Maybe 2.5 seems pretty good to me. Then to get our clumps, we're going to turn on children and simple, and we're going to up the radius of that, but they're all facing the same direction as their parents, which is just boring. So let's go ahead and up the randomness a little bit too by dragging this, and this will randomize the children, and it will also make them a little bit less straight. So now we have some neat looking grass clumps here. Let's make a material for them. That will be new, and we are going to have a diffuse of maybe a dark green. This is like a dark yellow green. This is like some dead grass that's poking through maybe. And then we are going to add some translucency. So shader, mix shader. Nope, we don't want mix. When you're doing translucency, you want to add. So we're going to add a shader, and we're going to add a translucence shader. And as soon as I add this, it's going to be super bright. Our grass is solid white now. And how you adjust how translucent it is with the add shader, since there is no value here, we can just drag down the value, and now it is a lot less translucent. But you can see the light leaking through. But it's kind of ugly, so we also want to add a little bit of color to our translucence to make it a bit prettier, I suppose is a good word for that. So that is looking like some grass, but if the grass is going to be poking through the snow, we're going to want to add some bumps where it is poking through. So let's go back to our sculpt mode, and we're going to, we can change the color of the hair. I haven't actually ever done it before. I've seen other people do it, but if we select our plane that has the particles on it and go to display, we can change the color to none, and that will give us black strands, and that will show us a little bit better where our grass is. So let's go ahead and go back to sculpt mode, turn on topology, enable dynamic, and we're just going to get the draw and turn the intensity down by hitting Shift F again, and we're just going to sort of oh, I have the wrong plane. I'm going to undo all of that. Alright, back to where we were. So, I'm also not happy with the placement of the grass, so let's go ahead and do that before we add in some sculpting, because once we sculpt, that is going to be where our grass is placed. So, we can turn off random to do that, and that way it will spawn on the faces in a pattern of some sort. But really we just want to play around with it until it is somewhere that we like. And we can do that by changing the seed, and that will change the random seed. That's changing the segments, whoops. And that will change the placement of the grass. So let's play around with that until we get something that we like a bit better. And I'm thinking that might look alright. Let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like rendered. And let's take a look at it in relation to the entire scene. I also think we want to make this a little bit bigger, which means we also need to edit the mesh again so that it does not collide with our regular mesh. So we want the grass to be poking up through the snow, if I am correct, which I believe I am. And we can move him over a little bit like that and correct the collision yet again. And that gives us some interesting looking grass. You all play around with yours until you get something that you like, but that looks pretty interesting to me. So, yeah, we have the grains. I'm just not quite happy with how that snow is looking. We can play with that later if we have time, but in the meantime I think let's maybe just up the strength a little bit. 0.8. Yeah, I can dig it. I think it looks alright. It's not the best in the world, and we're about to fix that by adding more sculpted detail in, because right now it's just really plain. So we're going to select the plane, center the view on it, go back to our snow plane, and go back to sculpt mode and enable dynamic topology. Then we're going to start drawing around the individual snow, and what I did for mine is I just added lumps, or around the grass I mean, so we're just going to add some clumps here. Like so. And that will make it look like the grass is sort of poking through the snow. And then we can add in a little bit more detail just by clicking around. Maybe add some indentations and such. Maybe add that up, coming up here a little bit. Maybe turn down the strength a little bit, just to add some sculpted detail in here. This project, making it look good, is all about spending time on sculpting your terrain, because otherwise it's just a boring snowy plain. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like rendered. So I'm going to hit Control V to look at just the grass, and that is looking a lot better in my opinion. And we can also add a little bit more lumps, I think. So we're going to go back to sculpt mode, go back to enable dynamic, and we're going to just like add in some bumps, just to make it interesting. We can smooth out this area a little bit, and then a couple tricks that I used is, like, the ground is not going to be perfectly flat or perfectly smooth. So in the snow, we want to use the clay first of all, because the clay sort of scrapes off. The draw straight up draws down into it. So I'm going to use clay and just change the strength down a lot, and then we're just going to sort of draw these little indentations around here. Shift C is for crease. We're going to sort of crease the indentations and then smooth them out just a little bit. And that'll just add a slight, subtle indentation into our snow. That might actually be a little bit strong, but details like that are what makes the snow really look good. That bump is just not quite right. Another thing we might try, which I lost control of my keyboard there again. I think it was editing something, so we're going to render again and see if it... Okay, nothing screwed up too much. But no, that snow is looking alright. Maybe change the strength down a little bit. Yeah, maybe change the strength down a little bit. Again, this is all tweaking. You all play with it, tweak it to hell. And then something we can also do that might make the snow look a little more realistic is we can add a translucency shader mixed in with it. So we can add shader, shader, translucent, and plug that right in. And it'll take longer to render for sure, but it will make the light penetrate the mesh a little bit, which will smooth out the bump. So let's render just a small area and see what that is looking like. And then if we turn off the add shader, it's not really affecting it that much. I think it's because the light is so far away and it's not that strong by the time it reaches this point. But if we want to, we can up the value of this higher than 1 just by typing values in, which is going to make it very grainy. Another thing you can do to make the snow look a little bit more realistic is that is too strong. I keep going back and forth as to how strong I want it. We're going to go ahead and turn that off so it's no longer adding that in. I think maybe that's a pretty good strength, but we also want the detail to be down to 1 because these lumps don't need to be super detailed, they just need to be bumps in the snow. And we're actually going to add this instead because that way the bumps will stay more consistent instead of overlaying. Because this will allow our bump map to go greater than 1 if it really needs to. Lots of tweaking. Maybe up this up to 2 again. Maybe even up to 5. The detail is just how many passes it does. I think that's starting to look like pretty decent snow. Maybe make the bumps a little bit bigger. And then play with the intensity some more. And that is starting to look like a snowy hill. So I'm going to sculpt in a bit more detail on this guy right here. Let's go back to our camera view so we can see the details that we're adding. And let's go into sculpt mode and enable dynamic topology, like so. And let's just start sculpting. So I'm going to use the clay and just add in some nice dips and stuff every once in a while, like just big patches of sort of flatness or sculpted downness, and that will sort of help. And sculpting, by the way, a really good trick for sculpting is to turn on, under display shading, we can do matte cap, and we can change this to something reflective, for instance, and that'll show us where detail is a lot better on our object. You do have to be careful though, because sometimes it can misrepresent and make it look either more or less detailed than it is. So like, it might cause you to go too drastic on your changes, basically is what I'm trying to say. So you really need to watch out for that, but otherwise the matte cap can be very useful for sculpting. ZBrush is actually pretty much purely in matte caps for most of the sculpting you do in it. At least when I used ZBrush, that's what I used, because the matte caps are pretty cool and fast and show sculpting detail very well. Then I think we want to add some more grass in the background, so we're just going to duplicate this and rotate it. Nobody will ever know. And we can move this right over here. Let's put it on top of the hill, which we can adjust further in the viewport. So let's put the grass somewhere like that, and we can modify it like so. And we want this to come up a little bit, I think, just so the grass isn't so hidden. And let's go ahead and take a look at what that is looking like rendered. Remember, I selected the whole camera, so now I need to go back to border and render. Alright, we are getting a pretty neat looking snow type scene. Pretty cool. Might make the grain on the snow stronger, less strong, whatever you want to do. It's all up to you. And also going to up the roughness on the glossiness. Again, lots of tweaks. That is what it is all about. But the snow will have a highlight. The highlight will give us these nice highlights along the snow, but it's also going to be pretty rough. Because the snow isn't going to be like super glossy like that. It's going to be rougher, like maybe 0.55 or something. And that'll give us some nice highlights, and we can also mix this by like maybe 0.1 to get those a little bit stronger. And we can also, this is going to be a lot of sculpting effort, a lot of just tweaking it until it looks good. But if we smooth out the hills a little bit, smooth out the transitions here, we can get more rim lighting. On the hill. So that will take a lot of tweaking, maybe add some detail in. Like so. Just make it a bit flatter so there's more area to catch the light. And we want to bring, no, I think that's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and render it. And now it's just starting to catch a little bit of a rim. You can smooth it out more if you want to get that fancy rim lighting in there. But this is looking pretty decent. Let's go ahead and sculpt in some detail for the grass, add some depth of field, do a little bit of compositing tricks, and call it a day. So, sculpt mode, again, enable dynamic, draw, and we're just going to draw some nice lumps here around the grass, like so. Maybe even lump it up a little bit, add some splotches, do whatever you want, whatever you think looks good here, and then go back to object mode because it's not going to update in the render view when you're in sculpt mode. If you go back to object mode, it will update, and those bumps are not nearly drastic enough. Like I said, this has a tendency to make stuff look more drastic than it is, the matte cap does, so we're going to have to go ahead and intensify those bumps. So I'm just going to sculpt them up a little bit like that, just so they'll be more visible in the viewport. And let's try that. Wow, it's still not very intense. That matte cap, man. Let's turn it off, because it is tricking me. So, go back to sculpt mode again. Enable dynamic. That little pop-up was because I accidentally went into vertex paint mode, so it created a vertex paint map. And it was saying basically, hey, the dynamic topology isn't going to keep your vertex paint data when you sculpt, or it might mess it up. So I just hit OK, because that doesn't matter to us because we're not using vertex paint in this tutorial. And let's just bump it up a good bit around here. Just add lots of detail to our snow. And I'm going to come back here and just start adding bumps and depressions just to make it a little bit more detailed, like so. And you'll notice with the rougher specular highlight, it is definitely looking a lot more like snow in how it catches the light. Go back to object mode. Now we have these more drastic bumps that are actually hiding the grass a bit too much. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the grass up here a little bit, like so. And we're also going to turn the translucence down a little bit on the grass. So we're just going to take this and drag it down to make the grass a little bit darker, a little bit more backlit. And that is looking pretty neat. And if you want to add a mountain in the background, I said I wasn't going to go over this, but why the hell not? It's pretty fast. You can go to add-ons, and it's the Ant Landscape Generator. Just hit that checkbox. Let's go to a new layer to create our mountain. And we hit Shift A, Mesh, and add a landscape. And that looks like a mountain to me, so we'll go ahead and use it for the tutorial. So we're just going to turn both layers on. Move this guy way back into the background. Scale him up to like a bajillion D. Rotate him, maybe something until he looks interesting, like so. Maybe scale him up a little bit, drag him down. The interesting thing about this is we can add the same mountain over and over again, rotate it and scale it, and it will look like different mountains. Nobody will ever know the difference. We can even have them collide, and again, nobody will ever know the difference. Let's go ahead and hit Control 1 to subsurf these by a factor of 1, and we'll apply the scale to each of them. And let's just add a basic, let's go ahead and add one more mountain, I think. Just to have a little bit more detail back there. And the clipping on our camera is not going far enough because we can barely see that mountain, so I'm going to up it to 4,000. And now you can see that mountain back there, and it is huge. So just duplicate these around until you get something that you like so. And that's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like rendered. These mountains are going to be ugly as all hell. They're also colliding with our light, which is exactly what we do not want. So we're going to have to move our light up and play with that a little bit. Our mountains might just be too tall for our light. But that is quite alright. We can just scale Mr. Mountain here down. And that will allow us to move our light down. I'll let you all tweak that. I'm just going to show you how I set up a basic, very basic mountain material. And that is, oh, also, geez, let's up the brightness on this again to 40K. Maybe even 50K. This tutorial is almost at an hour. Let's go super fast on these mountains here. We're going to add a new material, call it a mountain, and do the same thing for these guys. Give them all the same material. Which there is an easier way to do that, which I'm going to show you right now. Let's pretend that I didn't do all of that. We can select all these objects, select the object that has the material, hit Control L, and link materials. And that will make all of the objects selected have the same material, which would have been a lot easier and less time consuming now that I think about it. So mountains are generally dark gray-ish with snow on them. And to get the snow on them, we are, so you're going to make this a little bit darker, and then we're going to hit Control C on this and add a color mix RGB like so. Paste, paste, have one bright, one dark, and then we're going to mix that with a, let's get in here close on our mountains just so we can see this in action. And we're going to mix this based on a texture, noise texture, factor, input texture coordinate, object, and up the scale to all hell, maybe like 200. We're going to make one of the colors red just so we can see the differentiation better. So let's zoom in here and see what our mountain is looking like. We can also go to converter color ramp to up the contrast just so we can see if it is working correctly. Oh, I was making the noise too small. It needed to be a lower value, like so. Maybe like 0.1, maybe like 0.3. And then we want the contrast to be a lot less. And then our mountain also does not need to be red. So we'll just add some nice darkness in there. And for my mountain in my image, for the factor, I actually ended up using a texture from CG Textures that was a rock texture, because that'll give you a much more natural result than some noise. Heck, why not? Let's go ahead and show you how I did that too. It's basically the same as using the noise, except you can do texture, image texture. Now that requires UV unwrapping. Yeah, we're just going to stick with the noise for this tutorial. But you can unwrap the mountains and they will unwrap pretty well. I don't want to go with it right now, just because I'm sorry, I'm playing with the details. I'm a tweaker. I like to tweak the stuff. I didn't go with that method just what was I saying? Oh, I'm not doing that in the tutorial just because it would take so long because the mountains are pretty high subdivision. But I mean, this is all right for now. And then we can add in some displacement, texture, noise texture, factor, input texture coordinate, object, maybe like 0.3. And we really want to rotate the mountains so that they get some light on them. Or move the light so that the mountains get some light on them and quit casting shadows on each other. That's all about tweaking. We're going to come over here to the other side where the light is actually hitting the mountains. Just so we can see what this material is looking like. And it's looking awful. But regardless, that's how you add the mountains using the Ant Landscape Generator. I'm going to keep going here, babbling on about how I did this just because I started. Now I feel like I have to finish. So, we're going to mix this color with another color. It's going slow because it's rendering, and that's why I set this to 50-50 instead of infinite. And we can input, or texture, noise texture. We want to use the object coordinate yet again. We want to add a color, mix RGB. We want the white. We're going to put the noise as the factor. Then we're going to make this like 0.01 and color or converter, color ramp, and then up the contrast to all hell. These need to be darker, just so you can see the snow better when it shows up. Okay, that definitely needs to be bigger. Yeah, it looks pretty awful, not gonna lie. How you can make the bump more prominent is using a converter color ramp, and then you can change the contrast. So right now it's going from 0 to 1. We can make it go all the way up to as high as we want. So like 0 to 20 will give us much bumpier results, and we probably want this to be a lot smaller just so we get more of a rock look. And we can even up this value more to like 30 or 40. Not 340, that's a bit drastic. Maybe 50. Cool. And then to finish out with the snow, we want to tweak this until there are large patches of snow. So maybe something like that. Change the color. And then we can take this and come over here, do a color mix RGB, and then do an add, like so. And this is not going to be nearly bright enough, so we're going to go ahead and say color or converter, color ramp, and we're going to change the 1 up to maybe like 20. Maybe up to like 40. Oh, yeah, it's working. So you can see that the snow is now elevated on top of this, but this snow detail is really low, so let's up that to maybe 14, and that'll give us some more interesting snow. I know these mountains look pretty bad, but they're just background, and what we're about to do is fade them out using some atmospheric perspective. Also, I think the snow patches could be a little bit bigger, like so. But to get atmospheric perspective, we are going to sample the color of the sky. Go over here to our mountain material right before it gets plugged in. Go to Shader Mix and Shader Emit. And that is going to mess with our lights a lot, because now it's going to have all of these rays to bounce. And how you make it not do that is you go into the object settings right here and you turn off pretty much everything. Pretty much everything. You don't want it to affect the shadow pass, or anything like that. So we can just turn all of that off except for camera. I think we can keep shadow. But as soon as we do that, it will fix our graininess issue, and our light goes back to normal. So this is obviously mixing a bit much and also the wrong color. So how to get the atmospheric perspective to look decent is to use the color picker and pick it from your sky. So maybe something like that. And then play with the value here, like maybe 0.3. And that will help make your mountains look further back in the background. And the further back the mountain is, you want it to have its own custom materials. See, you can do this in compositing, but I chose to do it in render. So we are going to create individual materials for each of the mountains, like so, and then pick their respective colors and play with their respective values. So this guy will be its own guy, and we'll go ahead and pick the white. Definitely not the white, maybe more like a pink. This guy's closer, so we're going to pick a darker color. This is all up to you how you want it to look, but this is just how I achieved the atmospheric perspective personally. Just tweak the values until it looks pretty good to you. Then, for a final little tweak to our snow scene that is coming along gorgeously, we can add some depth of field, and we want it to focus on the monkey, so we're going to name this, oh, it's already named Suzanne. That's what I was going to name it. What a coincidence. We're going to select our camera, come here, select the focus to Suzanne, and then change the size to maybe 0.1. And that will add just a little bit of blurring. Since we're outside and the sun is bright, the blurring would not be that drastic in real life. But that'll add just a little bit of nice depth of field, maybe 0.5. No, definitely 0.3. Yeah, that looks alright. So then we can render it out. I'm going to go ahead and pause while this renders. Again, you're going to want to add more snow detail, more lumps, more bumps, more hills, whatever. Play with your mountain texture and everything. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the atmospheric perspective on all of these, just so you can get a better idea of how I would approach doing the atmospheric perspective in post. So yeah, that'll work pretty well. And before you render, make sure under your render settings, under your render layers, that passes Z is turned on, because that is what we are going to use for the depth of field or atmospheric perspective in post. So let's go ahead and make sure that our depth is still focusing on the monkey, just so it has a target, and we can turn on limits for that, and it is still focusing on where'd you go, Suzanne? Oh yeah, it's still focusing on Suzanne, so you'll see that the limits match Suzanne, which is perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and pause and render. Okay, so I started rendering and I realized that these grass clumps are way too thick, and the reason for that is under the children settings on the particles is a setting for display and a setting for render. I liked how the display looked, maybe a little bit more dense, so I'm going to go with 14 for render, and I'm going to go ahead and pause again while I'm rendering. Alright, my scene is finished rendering. That snow is not looking as good as it was in the viewport. It needs to be grainier, so we can go ahead and up the depth on that by changing the color ramp, but I'll leave that to you all. So this is what our scene is looking like. It's kind of needs more snow detail really, but let's go ahead and get into the comp tricks since the tutorial is already really long. And how we do that is by going into the node editor and clicking the render nodes button right here. And then we have to use nodes or they will not show up, and then we want to turn on our backdrop. Then to actually see something on our backdrop, we Control-Shift-Click, and that creates a viewer node. And what we want to do with our viewer node is work on that atmospheric perspective that I was talking about. And how we do that is with a vector normalize and grab the Z value here. and plug that in like so, and that will give us this, which is pretty cool. So then we want to take that and do a color bright / contrast, change this to the color RGB curves, which is how I normally do it. I was going to do brightness contrast to make it easier, but that shows me for not doing stuff that I'm familiar with. Then plug the image into the image, and we can lower the contrast like so. And you're going to notice you get this grainy effect right here, and that's because I did the depth of field in cycles. How we can fix that is by blurring this a little bit. So filter, blur. I was trying to do like the neat, okay, there we go, where it plugs in just by dragging over. And let's go ahead and turn this to relative and 2 by 2, maybe 1 by 1. We can look at it, and we just want to blur it until it gets rid of the grain. So maybe 0.5 by 0.5 is, nope, 1 by 1 is pretty good. Okay, so that gets rid of the grain. Now back to our RGB curves, we can up this to make that brighter in the background based on the depth. So now the closer ones will be darker, the further ones will be brighter. And let's also go ahead and map in some blue, like so. And that gives us some nice atmospheric perspective. Now if we had rendered this image out with transparency, or on multiple layers, we could comp in the sky to get that to be full color again. But we don't have any of that data. So how you would do that is, yeah, I know how we can do it like this. This is going to be a comp cheat. So we're going to take this right here, our blur, and we are going to, not our blur, yeah we are. We're going to take this, we're going to do a color RGB curves, plug it right in to the image, like so, and then drag this way until all of the mountains are black and the sky is white. Some intense node work there. Let's go ahead and compare this. So not quite there yet. Let's put you at 0.99. That gets us pretty close. If you really want to, you can go to color or normal, vector, map value, grab RZ, and use minimum, use maximum, and offset this. Make the size lower and then offset it until you see results. Okay, now it's starting to go back like so. Minus 2000. Oh, it does not go any further back. Okay, we're gonna have to go with this method. This is trial and error for me at this point because I didn't render out a transparent background. That is my fault, and I apologize for that. But this is a neat trick anyway. So then we can take color mix, and we can mix in our original image over our desaturated, decontrasted one, and do this as the factor. But before we do that, color mix over, and we're going to clamp. And now the sky is being mixed over, and that just looks awful. This was an experiment, this part was, but we can take this and filter blur it some if we really want to. Of course that gives us a little bit of a haze, so I mean, I'm just gonna get rid of that mix and stick with this because it looks pretty cool. But that gives us some nice atmospheric perspective on the mountains there. Then let's go ahead and add a vignette. My favorite method for doing that was in a previous tutorial, but I'll go ahead and do it anyway. So input RGB and up it to white, distort, lens distortion, distort, scale, scale it to the render size, lens distort value of 1, color mix, mix it over, and that'll give us black background, filter blur, relative, 20 by 20 is pretty good usually. That will do, that will do. Color invert, and then color RGB curves, and plug this in as a factor. and then we can darken the edges like so, and that'll give us a nice focus on the image. It'll just give us a nice vignette. I'm a sucker for vignettes. They're not always completely necessary, but hey, it's whatever, man. Cool, so that is the finished image for the tutorial. I'll let you all tweak it, tweak the grain in the snow, tweak the bumps, do whatever you want, but that is how I approached making this snow scene right here. Yeah, my grain is a lot more grainy. Probably the grains are a bit smaller, but hey, whatever. Do what you want to make your snow scene look good. I'm going to call it quits right there because this tutorial is going over. This tutorial is a little bit messy and I apologize for that, but if you want a new tutorial every Tuesday, make sure you subscribe to this channel. And I hope you learned a few things about maybe sculpting, maybe compositing, whatever. I hope this tutorial is helpful to you, and that will be all.